All right, beautiful humans. Welcome back to another episode of Naked Sunday. I'm your host, Caleb Nelson. I got a new friend here today, Jimi Fritz. Thank you for coming to the show, man.
Nice to be here. Welcome from Vancouver.
From Vancouver. Awesome. Well, I'm here down in Saratoga County, at least right now. I was just telling you before we hopped on the show here that really enjoyed just the little blurb that you had sent to me about what you do and what you've been experiencing in your life. I'm very excited to get to know you a little better. What I love to do, just start off all these episodes with just a small token of my appreciation of why I value you as a human being, because I think in this world, we probably would be a lot better off if we just shared why we appreciate each other. But even just the things you shared, I admire anybody who ventures off into the world and goes and experiences things and puts themselves in unique situations and comes back and shares a story, because then a lot of people can learn from it. And just knowing that you've published a couple books and just specifically your most recent book, Confessions of an Ethical Drug Dealer, where you're tapping into psychedelics and talking about religion and things like that, all topics that I'm deeply fascinated by. Thank you for just coming and being willing to share your story today. I'm super grateful for it.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
My pleasure. To that effect, my first question today, you know yourself better than I do. So Jimi, who are you?
Who am I? Oh, I've been a lot of things, it's been a long journey. My new book, Confessions of an Ethical Drug Dealer by Jimi Fritz, is a 50-year journey. So it starts when I'm 15 and I have my first pint of beer and then my first joint. And then it's basically my story with psychedelics over the last 50 years of selling and buying and doing and experimenting. And then that's woven in with my geographical journeys, which has been quite extensive too. I've done a lot of traveling and lived in a lot of different countries. And so, it's a very long and storied history. So one of the reasons for writing the book was to, just kind of document that. Because even friends that I have now that I've had for many, many years still don't really know the extent of my story. And the book really covers, 10% of it, because there were so many stories and events and happenings and experiences that I couldn't possibly put them all in. And when I started listing all the things, I wrote, no, this is going to be like 1,000 pages long. So I had to kind of pare it down. So the stories in there are kind of representative of something to do with, my philosophy at the time, overlaid with my psychedelic drug experiences.
Wow. If you mind sharing, what drew you into the psychedelic realm? And I'd be curious to hear some lessons along the way. Obviously, if you're not all the stories could get put in the book, I'd love to hear some outside of the book stories as well that were meaningful to you.
Yeah, well, that was the hardest thing, is what to leave out and what to put in. But as for why I was attracted to psychedelics, I think it's just the same reason that I was attracted to traveling. Was that I knew that there was more to life than I grew up in a town in England called Crawley, Sussex, and it was a really backward place. It was a poverty-stricken, black hole of vortex which kind of sucked the life out of people. Everyone was depressed and broke, and a lot of violence and racism. It was just this horrible place. And I knew, even when I was a child at school, that there must be more to life than this. So then I started traveling at 17. I left the country and started traveling around Europe. And I think the interest in psychedelics came from the same type of impulse. It was just this idea that there's more to my mind, there's more to my consciousness, there's more to life than meets the eye. And psychedelics are a great way of exploring your own personality and your own psyche, and then reflecting that back into the world, and it creates a loop. And it's very much like, I described the book as a geographical and psychological journey, psychedelic journey, which is, and there's lots of parallels between, physical traveling and psychological traveling. So that was the link for me.
What was your first psychedelic experience like? It's everybody's got their own interesting, unique tap into that if they've ever dabbled in it. But what was that like for you?
I guess the first Well, I start off in the book and I describe my first pint of beer.
Mm.
That was really the gateway drug for the rest of my life. Was a pint of bitter. So, and then came hashish, at like 14, I think, and that kind of changed my mind, because I thought, wow, this is you can change the whole world with the substance. And that was a revelation. So that was quite profound. My first hash joint, standing down by the river with a bunch of other friends, and somebody just pulled this out and said, this is hashish, you want to try some? And I said, yeah, sure. Mostly I just said yes. And it was a revelation. And I thought, wow, it's amazing what the mind can do, what the brain can do. And that was the beginning. And then a little shortly after that, my first full-blown psychedelic experience was with LSD. And that was really the only negative experience I've ever had
Really?
in my entire life with psychedelics, because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what LSD was. I didn't know what the effects were. I didn't know what was happening, and I took a massive dose. So, it was all just a big accident. So it was basically, and I put that story in the book, and it's at the beginning of the book, because it's like just an example of how to do everything wrong. Like wrong set, wrong setting, wrong time, wrong play, like everything, not knowing anything about it, not being prepared, not understanding what's happening. All these things can, if you're in that situation, then you can have a bad experience. But in 50 years of psychedelic drug experimentation, that's the first and only bad experience I've ever had. So if you know what you're doing and you do it responsibly, there's really very little downside.
That's pretty fascinating. I think a lot of people don't, obviously there's a very taboo thought for many around that. I'm curious about like your travels around the world, and like, especially as you brought up like religion with this, what parallels and what overlapping disciplines did you see? Did you participate in any like ceremonies or anything like that where it was interwoven into like the culture? And I'm also curious, just like, what was the mindset, or what was the perception in other places that you've seen around using this tool? For a lot of, my own research has been like a tool to open the mind and to explore, much as you said, it's a journey, a different type of journey. I've shared a little bit on my podcast, my time doing ayahuasca. I'm just curious to see like what different experiences you've encountered with that as you've traveled.
Well, I guess I grew up in a Christian kind of environment, although both my parents were atheists, and they sent me to Sunday school, I think twice. I didn't like it, never went back. And I never really bought that, not ever. Not even as a child. It always sounded to me like, creator gods and devils and ghosts and none of that made any sense to me. I was always suspicious of that. So I kind of rejected that right off the bat. But as I was traveling, of course, I met a lot of people that were into different things. I met some Munis, and I met some sannyasis, and I met some, the Rajneesh people, and the, all these people were following. That was big in the 60s, right? People were going to India, and I did that trip, right? I did the classic overland India trip, where I went to Europe and hitchhiked to Istanbul and got on a double-decker bus with 14 other people and went through Tehran and Iran and
Wow.
and Pakistan, and then into India. And everybody was going to India to find themselves. And just because it was a really incredibly wacky place. So I met a lot of seekers on the road, and people were experimenting with lots of different things. I did get into, I never joined any type of formal group or followed any specific guru or anything, but I did a lot of meditation.
Yeah.
Did meditation with Buddhist monks, and did a lot of Zen meditation and that type of thing. And I think that's useful. I think that's a good psychological tool to have, to be able to quieten your mind. But I never bought any of the fantasy land stuff about creator gods and other worlds and dimensions and all that. And that's a problem for me in psychedelics sometimes, because you get into these conversations where you've got people like Terence McKenna and others who postulate, that when you do DMT, you're catapulted into another universe, another dimension. I don't believe any of that. Because I don't see any evidence for any of that. It does feel like that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's, it feels like you're in another world. It feels like all the rules have changed. And to some degree, that's true, because all the rules in your brain have changed. Mm-hmm. But I never bought any of the supernatural or paranormal aspects of religions or, religious teachings, or what people call now spiritual. They say, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. And I say, what do you mean by spiritual? Turns out it's religious. So, yeah, I'm very skeptical about all of that stuff. And but I do believe that psychedelics are very, very powerful tools to change your mind, change your behavior, stimulate creativity, open your mind, solve problems, and have a better life. Basically, I think they do. They've done that for me. They've given me a much fuller, richer experience of my life. And that's the real value, I think.
How, as you're talking about, it provided this richer, more full experience, like how did it change things for you? Like what did you discover along the way for yourself?
I think it just changes the way you think, and it changes the way that you perceive and your perception and awareness of the world. You're aware that not everything is as it is, right? Your senses are actually quite deceptive in a lot of ways. They do trick us. Most people never question that. They just think, okay, that's what it looks like, so that's what it is. But if you do psychedelics, it lets you see things in a different way, with a different perspective, and then you can apply that to other things. So I think it just expands. I mean, what it does basically, the psychedelic experience, is it creates new neural pathways for the same experience. So if you have an experience over and over again, your brain creates this neural net, which is basically a map of that experience. So every time you experience it, it's the same. So, that's our mundane reality, which we create. And, we have to do that because we can't have, we can't be hallucinating all the time. But what psychedelics do is they kind of rewire the brain. So you have that same experience of looking at a flower, and now instead of a flower, it's this moving, living, breathing organism, which of course it is, but you see it in a completely different way. So, and that persists once you've rewired your brain, once you've created that neuroplasticity, then that can be applied to any situation. And there was a lot of high-level chemists and physicists and biologists and scientists that were using psychedelics through the 60s and early 70s. It was a very interesting newsletter from MAPS. I don't know if you know. Have you heard of MAPS?
I have.
The Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. They're about to legalize MDMA as a treatment for PTSD. Wow. But they produce this newsletter once a year. So a few years ago, they got all these scientists to basically confess, that they've been using LSD and psilocybin during these major breakthroughs. And then they, one after another, it was like major breakthrough in biology, Nobel Prize winners, discovery of the DNA molecule, the virtual reality language for computers, all these things, Windows. All these things were developed under the influence of LSD. And so that's the type of impact. I mean, people have no idea how much impact that psychedelics have had on our daily life today. Because they were illegal and people were hiding and people didn't talk about it. But now they're starting to talk about it, and now they're being legalized everywhere. And now they're being legitimized everywhere, and there's real research going on. We're going to discover that our world has already been transformed by psychedelics, and will continue to be so. And I think we're better off for it. I mean, where would we be without Jimi Hendrix, right?
I mean, yeah. Listen,
we didn't have Jimmy without LSD.
Fair point. Yeah. I mean, you think about the music of the time there, like that was pretty transformative of itself. And clearly there's still influences of it to this day. I mean,
That's right. I mean, that did, and that again was a psychedelic influence, right, on culture. It transformed the world of art and culture in a decade, and a lot of it was due to people changing the way they thought and thinking in new ways and different ways and coming up with new music and new ideas and new art. And yeah, it's been very, very influential, much more so than most people are aware of, I think.
Well, I think also, I'm curious to hear your commentary on it too, is like the demonization of it makes it impossible to have an open and honest and thoughtful conversation around what the benefits could be. Like, I'm a big believer, like everything has trade-offs. It is what it is. Like nothing is all good or all bad. It is. What are you looking to use a tool for? And are you willing to take the risk and accept the consequences of it? You said in a situation that you talked about your first trip with LSD, I was like, that was my worst one. Well, you did all the wrong things. Well, what if it hadn't been that way? What if you had somebody who could have shepherded you through that experience with a little more foresight and educated you and dosed the thing appropriately? Like,
yeah,
I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that, like the culture and the demonization around it.
Yeah, well, it's the unknown. There's a puritanical kind of aspect to it that people think if you get high, then that's some kind of, it's hedonistic pleasure, and so we've always frowned on that. And that again is probably religious based, that it's some kind of a sin to experience pleasure. So I think that's the kind of the underlying fundamentals of it. But then there's this other level of, this fear of the unknown. People put all these drugs into one category. The word drugs is bantered around, really irresponsibly. There are a lot of different drugs and there are a lot of different effects. And basically what my experience has been is with psychedelics, and that's it's a class of drugs that enhances and increases your perception and awareness of the world, and a lot of good things from come. And then you've got the opiates and the coke and the crack and all this stuff, and people are doing those drugs for a completely different reason. They're not doing those drugs to engage with themselves, engage in the world, to discover themselves. They're using those drugs as masking problems, masking psychological problems. Well, that's a whole different ballgame. That's a medicinal use. That's like taking a painkiller for pain. Psychedelics are a completely different class of drugs. And that's one of the things that needs to happen, is we need to separate these things out. People need to understand that there are different classes of drugs for different things. We have drugs to help us sleep. We have antidepressants. We have, crack and opiates, and we have psychedelics. These are all completely different drugs. They're done by different people for different reasons. And we need to be much more specific when we're talking about drugs in general.
Which brings an interesting thought to mind here, as you just elaborate on that, is like the use of psychedelics can be deployed in a way to more or less examine oneself. I heard the two different classifications. The way you're describing is like, one is more dissociate, painkiller, cut off the pain, but the pain is still going to exist. Like the root of the pain is still there. Sounds like much the purpose or the proper use of a psychedelic, however you want to describe it, aside from just the joy aspect, is the self-examination, the self-exploration. The thought that came to my mind was, especially as you elaborate, is like the fear of the unknown. And to me, there's almost this fear of like, well, what if that problem I've been holding on to my entire life is no longer a problem?
Right.
What am I then? Have you seen any resistance around that with people?
Well, yeah, I think that's a natural resistance. I mean, it's like people that, if you're brought up in a religious environment, for instance, and you believe all the tenets of that religion, and then sometimes later, maybe decades later, you start to question it. To change your mind at that point is the longer you hold an idea, the harder it is to change it, because you have to kind of admit that you've been wrong for all the time previous to changing your mind.
Yeah.
And that's pretty hard for people to do, because they feel like it negates their their existence or their previous life. So it's very hard. I mean, generally, it's very hard for people to change their minds anyway. So I think, I always say that it's impossible to get an adult to change their minds. We have to work on children. We have to indoctrinate children from when they're 5 years old and teach them critical thinking and teach them logic and reason and teach them compassion and empathy. And these are the things that, make good human beings. We need to teach Stoicism to 5-year-olds. That's my solution, because then you can actually, mold their characters. You can't change adults' mind, especially when they're entrenched. I mean, you see it everywhere now. Everybody's got these extreme positions on everything, and nobody's budging, no matter what the evidence, no matter what the new information is. That makes no difference. And and I think that's just an unfortunate situation, but it's one that we find ourselves in, and I'm not sure that that we're going to get out of it easily.
Well, begs the question, like, does everybody need like this cataclysm, not a cataclysm, like this very powerful experience where you use a substance, just like remove, like take a step, almost like you take a step back and you examine yourself from an objective standpoint, examine your world and where you're going and how you're interacting, much like you're saying, like, does it take something so, I'm going to call it, I guess, cataclysmic to help?
Or catalytic.
Catalytic, yes, that'd be the better
Yeah.
word. Pardon me, I'm missing the language there, but I hear a lot of that, like their belief systems are so entrenched in their identity of being
Yes.
right, and
Yeah.
to say I was wrong. You said it before. It negates their existence from before, but it doesn't. It doesn't necessarily negate their existence from before, and it means like, this is what you did. And I mean, from my perspective, I could watch somebody who's gone through being really rigid on one side and can open their mind and see the world through a different lens because they were willing to go through a transformative experience. I personally find a lot of deep value and admiration for somebody like that. So my hope is that people could start to realize, like, oh wait, that is kind of cool, like that you're willing to do that. It's not, I don't see it as a sign of weakness or frailty or anything of that way. But you brought up Stoicism, and that really scratched an itch. I'm big on that. What's drawn you to Stoicism?
I just think the Greeks had everything right, like the 1,000 years before Christ. They just got everything right. They figured it out. They rejected their gods and their mythology, and they concentrated on reason and logic and critical thinking and an examined life, right? So what better way to examine a life than psychedelics? And that's, they're a great tool for changing your mind, because this entrenchment that we get into these fixed positions, and we just don't know how to change our minds. But there's no more powerful psychological tool than psychedelics to actually change your mind, to actually change the way you think and change your behavior. And that's why we're seeing this explosion in psychedelic psychotherapy right now. And there's a new psychedelic medicinal centers, psychedelic medicine centers basically open up in University of Texas and Stanford. University of Toronto just opened one.
Wow.
John Hopkins has one. On and on and on, right? There's this huge explosion now, because like Timothy Leary discovered in the 60s, he was a psychologist, and he said, was trying to change people's behavior. Basically, that's what a psychologist and psychiatrists are trying to do. They're trying to change the way you think and behave. And he said that he did studies. He found a third of the people with regular talk therapy, a third of the people got better, a third of the people stayed the same, a third of the people got worse. Without the therapy, it was exactly the same statistics. So it's very, very ineffective. It's a very temporary effect. It makes people feel better for a little while if they talk to somebody and get it off their chest or whatever. But it doesn't really change their neurology. It doesn't really change the way they think. And psychedelics do. And that's what's happening now, is they're using psychedelics for depression, for anxiety, end of life experiences. And they're getting these incredible results because people are actually able to, change their minds and change their behavior. There's a lot of psychedelic studies into addiction now. and they're using psychedelics for hardcore addicts and getting fantastic. Well, one of the first studies ever done in the world was in the early 50s in Manitoba in Canada. And they did a study with LSD with these hardcore alcoholics. They got these fantastic results. And of course, then it became illegal, and then it was shelved for 50, 60 years. So that was a problem with Prohibition. Because of Prohibition, all this research stopped. It was very promising, actually, in the 60s. There was a lot of things going on then, but then it all just shut down, and everybody walked away because they didn't want to lose their jobs.
Why did it get shut down?
That's because LSD became illegal.
What was the driving forces behind that, especially if there was promising research?
Oh, it was all these hippies jumping around having such a good time and looking really crazy and wigged out, and it freaked them out. And they went, "Oh no, what is this? What's going on? We got to shut it down." The same thing happened with MDMA, because MDMA was legal and up until the mid 80s, early 80s, 83, I think. Anyway, they all of a sudden they said, "Hey, what's going on with these raves?" And all these people, all these kids are just getting high on drugs and going crazy, and they're going to go insane. And so they just made it. They scheduled that drug as Schedule 1, which is no therapeutic value and addictive. Well, it's neither, right? And now we know that. And it's now going to be. It's taken 25 years for Rick Doblin at MAPS to campaign to get it as a prescription medication for PTSD. Just finished 3rd stage trials, and they're getting amazing results. I mean, they're taking the hardcore cases, right, from Iraq and from Afghanistan, all these soldiers that are coming back with PTSD. They're committing suicide at record numbers, and it's a real massive problem, and nothing works for them. So they're taking the most difficult cases and they're putting them through, and like 70% cure rate.
Wow.
With 2 or 3 sessions, and they're cured. So you can't say that about anything else, any other treatment for PTSD. And that's why it's fast tracked now. The FDA has actually fast tracked it to the end. So within the next year, MDMA, ecstasy, Molly, roll, X will be a prescription medication.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
It's happening right now.
Wow. So it took couple brave souls to do some serious research on this stuff to start to show it's not binary. It's not good or bad. It's what you make of it, huh?
It's taken 25 years of research to get to this stage.
Shows how dogmas can really, I mean, think of the thousands of lives, if not millions of lives, that could have been positively affected when you're talking about this PTSD stuff alone. Think of 1,000 other things that we're going to discover as time goes on. But just being able to explore the question or explore the thought of what could this be for people? That's kind of a shame when we just get into the binaries that way. We cut out it's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
But things are happening really, really quickly now. 13 cities in the States have now decriminalized psilocybin and and some of them all psychedelics. And so this is happening, and it's happening the same way as it happened with marijuana. That happened on cities started to legalize it, and then states started to legalize it, and then it works its way up to the federal level. That's the way it happened in Canada. Now we have legal recreational marijuana in Canada.
Wow.
National legal, pot. You've got pot stores in every town now. You just walk in and buy what you need. So that's happening with psychedelics now in the same way. It's these cities are actually decriminalizing it because they don't want to burden their police anymore. The police are, there's lots of police organizations that are for decriminalization and legalization of psychedelics and all drugs, because it causes, it takes up all their time and all their energy and all the emergency service. And they've just legalized these things. And if somebody's addicted to a drug, you just give them a prescription, give them a room and a prescription, they're no problem anymore. This happened in England in the 70s, and it worked fantastic. Everywhere it's been tried, it's worked. And people are still resistant because there's still this idea that, these people are just, doing it for fun or something. Or, It's not, it's still not considered to be a medical issue, and it should be. With the addiction problem, of course, psychedelics are not addictive, and so that doesn't even come into it, right?
Right. Well, what I think about is also just like when you make it, people, I think humanity is just naturally curious. And the more you try to hide something or take something away from people, it's like the second you tell me, no, you can't do this, I know for myself, it's like, well, now I want to. I didn't care about that much about it beforehand, but now that I can't, I want to. And of course, as a human, I like to consider myself a fairly responsible human being. I'll question the risks and the rewards, like what is the cost benefit analysis on that. But for some people who don't necessarily do that, you'll see a lot of people just be like full blown, I have to have this thing now. And you're increasing this mysterious nature about something that we could just have an open conversation like we're having right now about like, oh, this is how it's being applied. This is what it could be beneficial for. Like,
well, the irony is that, you know, the government, you know, institutes prohibition against the drug, and as a solution, right? They say, okay, we'll just make it illegal, and we've solved the problem, right? But that's never worked. It didn't work with alcohol. It didn't work with marijuana. It didn't work. I mean, when they Schedule I ecstasy, it exploded all around the world. There were 7 million hits a week being consumed in England. And it didn't slow anybody down. It didn't stop anybody from doing it. With the marijuana laws, you know, I mean, BC, Canada has been the pot capital of, you know, of North America for a long, long time. And Prohibition didn't stop any of that. I mean, it was the biggest industry in BC at one time.
Wow.
So Prohibition, I mean, it's not a solution to anything. It doesn't even slow things down, really.
Go figure. Opening a conversation and like letting people make their own decisions is it usually works out. People find a way to become responsible for themselves. Wild.
Well, that's what we should aspire to. That we should be aspiring to, making responsible citizens who make responsible choices, not just treating everybody like a criminal, or that they can't make up their own mind. And then that's another question about, you know, basic human right to be able to, you know, eat what you want, say what you want, think what you want, and change your consciousness any way you see fit, because it's yours, it's your body, it's your mind. And as an autonomous human being, that should be a basic human right. And I think we need to look at it in that way.
I'm 100% on board with that, my friend. The ability to self-govern. I mean, again, my day-to-day stuff is often just like coaching people. It's more often than not, people know what to do. They just are looking to explore the thought, and it's like they have the answer. Who am I to tell somebody how to live their life? I don't find any joy in that. And obviously we've shared a little bit about beforehand. I'm sure you've now really realized, like, I don't like being told what to do. Not one bit. So that doesn't work out too well for me.
No, it doesn't.
It's
it causes a reaction, you know, which is not the best solution or result.
Well, you spoke also about like secondary, like second order, third order, fifth order, 10th order consequences from one massive, just like, no, we're not doing this. Like to shut people down from being able to think for themselves, speak for themselves, govern for themselves, like govern themselves, be an owner of themselves.
Right, which is basic Stoicism 101, right? And that's what, then we're back to teaching the 5-year-olds in the schools now. You know, be responsible. Be responsible for what you say and do and think, how you act, and have it based on the principles of virtuous principles. And if you teach children that right from day one, that's going to change the world.
We need a little more of that, my friend. My wife is a teacher, and I tell her all the time, I'd love to build a school together and deploy much of what you're talking about, because I mean, just think about kids. Like, kids are naturally curious. They're going to explore those thoughts themselves. And if you can just help navigate them through those types of things, and like you said, learn empathy. How do you empathize? How do you find a way to be respectful of others? How do you learn how to be responsible with your own behaviors and understand consequences and things like that through your own individual experiences, not just projecting your own often bullshit onto some child that doesn't know, can't think their way through that. They don't have the wherewithal yet to be able to grapple with that from a really conscious place. You're kind of shooting a kid in the foot if you without giving them those tools that way.
And we're not really doing that. You know, the whole emphasis in schools is about retaining information and regurgitating information and learning information. You can do that on your own on the internet. You don't even need a school for that. You know, so especially with young kids and up to high school, you know, we need to be teaching people how to be better human beings, how to be more responsible, how to be more creative, how to, you know, be more responsible. That's how you change the world. We have to start with children. Like I say, adults are hopeless cause.
It's often too entrenched within our minds at that point. I agree with you what you're saying before. Like we get stuck in our ways, and very difficult to bend it, let alone break those molds.
Right.
What are you hoping comes from your work like this? I mean, I'm gonna have to get this book. I'm gonna have to read it myself. Like I'm excited to check it out. What you said, it's just really just an exploration of your own journey for 50 years.
Yeah, it was just something that I, you know, had in. I always thought I'd do. My other book is called Rave Culture: An Insider's Overview, and that was what, because I got involved in the rave scene in the 80s and the 90s, really.
Oh, tell me about that. Yeah.
And so I started. I had some very, very powerful experiences with MDMA at raves.
Really?
And I thought, wow, this is incredible. What's going on? And what I saw people's lives transformed, you know, every week. And it was pretty amazing and impressive. And so I wrote a book about that called Rave Culture: An Insider's Overview, available at fine bookstores everywhere. And because I was just so impressed with the culture, and I wanted to, and it was mostly underground, and it seemed like, you know, mainstream culture or society didn't really know what was going on. They just saw a bunch of kids on drugs, you know, and that's really actually not what was going on at all. But although that was a part of it. So that was the impetus for writing that book. This one was just to share my story, really, and to also promote a different way of thinking about drugs and psychedelics and you know, a virtuous life. It's basically a treatise on, you know, on Stoicism.
through the vehicle.
Here's a quote from the Stoic philosopher Seneca. This is on the back of the book. At times we ought to reach even the point of intoxication, not drowning ourselves, yet succumbing to it, for it washes away troubles and stirs the minds from its very depths and heals its sorrows, just as it does certain ills of the body. It frees the mind from bondage and makes it bolder in all that it attempts. There are times when the mind must be drawn into rejoicing and freedom, and gloomy sobriety must be banished for a while.
Ooh.
That's 1,000 years before Jesus.
That's some heavy stuff right there.
Yeah, no, I recommend people check out Stoicism because it really is just a simple code of living. And it's basically just taking responsibility for yourself, examining your own life, coming from a virtuous place. And it's just basic common sense, really. I mean, it's the stuff that, you know, 10-year-olds know and most adults don't. So there was a critical period about, you know, well, when the Romans took over Europe and the Middle East or whatever, and they had a choice at one point. There was a crossroads, that they could have gone with Stoicism with the Greeks or Christianity, and oh dear me, they chose Christianity. And look what a mess that got us into. Put us back 2,000 years. Think where we'd be, what kind of a world we'd be living in if we'd started following the Greeks then. So something to reflect on. But yeah, I recommend people check out Stoicism, read some Epictetus, read some Marcus Aurelius, And it's all basically the same stuff. It's just a very, very, very simple, logical, reasonable way to live a life.
I'm a big fan of all of that. I think it's also making a resurgence nowadays in more the common culture. I know Ryan Holiday, he's got Obstacle is the Way, and what's his other books? He got Courage is Calling and Stillness is the Key. Like, as we bring up the theme of it, is like taking responsibility for yourself. I guess and perhaps that's why society chose of those two paths, Stoicism or we'll call it a formal religion, a like set governing body. It's harder to take full responsibility for yourself. It's scary to do that. I think people are terrified of being like, it's all on me.
Yeah. No, it's true, and that's what religion does, and you know, any kind of organized, you know, spiritual groups, you just sign on the dotted line and say, yeah, I believe everything everybody else believes here, and so I'm good. I don't need to figure out anything for myself because, you know, it's all in the book, right? So that's what I follow, and that's what I subscribe to, so I never have to think again. It's sort of, you know, it's the end of rational thought, really, which is a very bad situation.
Well, yeah, again, we're talking about, you know, I brought up curiosity a few times. I think that curiosity is part of what has made us prosper in dark times. Like, our ability to think through difficult things and to find resolutions and to find new information and to expose faults and flaws that were holding us back from making massive progress. And, you know, you're talking about with psychedelics, bend your mind a little bit, which basically will then challenge you to ask the question of like, wait, am I right? Am I wrong? Am I looking? Is there another, even just saying like, is there another way to look at this, allows you to examine the same thing, as you had mentioned, from just a slightly different perspective. And that might have the answer that you were looking for all along, but you're just banging your head down that same path over and
Right.
over and over and over again.
Basically comes down to the ability of being able to change your mind. If you can change your mind, you can change your world. You can change everything. And that's the fundamental that we seem to have lost touch with. You know, we think the answers are everywhere else. They're not. You know, you have the answers to all your problems. You have the answers. You know what's right and wrong. You know, we know that innately. You ask 10-year-olds what's right and wrong, they'll get it right every time. They know what's right and wrong. It's an innate fundamental quality of human beings. And but we have so many overlays and so many distractions and so many deceptions on top of that we lose sight of it.
We get lost outside of ourselves. It's pretty wild, considering, again, I agree with you. The answers are within ourselves. If we just can quiet all the noise for a second and just listen to that little thought in there, to just say, hey, that's something in here sounds right. This is going to be in line with what I truly believe in. To think that we too easily offload our willingness to think.
Yeah, we always get it from we always think we got to get it from somewhere else. We always think somebody else has the answers. Somebody else has take another workshop or do another course or get some more therapy, because somebody else knows how to fix my problem and I don't. But I don't think that's true. I think most people know what their problems are. And if they, if they change their minds to the point where they think, yes, I can solve my own problems. I do know my own mind. I do know who I am. And then work with that, start there, and then build on that. That's how you change your life.
Might just seem scary though to say like, oops, I've been offloading this all along. Now I have to take ownership of that and responsibility. And if I fucked up, I might have to own up to a few of those mistakes along the way too,
or just let go of the past altogether, because it doesn't exist and it never did. So you can just say that, whatever mistakes you made in the past, it's irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant to your life today and your life going forward into the future. And to dwell on past mistakes or previous, issues is absolutely pointless. You don't need to go back into your life and relive every nasty thing that ever happened to you and own your shame and all this I think that's all counterproductive completely. I think you need to break with the past. You need to say, okay, the past was the past. Whatever happened, happened, whether it was good or bad or in between. All you can deal with is where you are right now today in this moment and into the future. That's what we need to be concentrating on, not dwelling on all the rotten things that happened to us and all the things that we think we did wrong. And that doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't give you anything. It drags you down.
That might be the quote of the thing. That's going to go up in the little teaser for everything. I like that a lot. I think a lot of people need to hear that. I mean,
I got a million of
them. Hence you wrote a book, brother. I mean, that was awesome. I'm curious. I mean, I've never written a book. I have a few friends now that have written books. What was that process like for you?
It's actually pretty easy. You know, I mean, people think it's, I guess, it's the way that you think about it again, right? You know, I never thought it was going to be difficult, and it never was. Like the Rave book was very easy to write because I, you know, really wanted to tell people about it. I had this impetus to tell people about it. That's Rave Culture, an insider's overview. And then with the Confessions, it was just my story. It's just me talking about my story and what I think about, and I can do that all day long. You know, because I do have something to say about everything. And so I just keep talking in a writing form. I'm writing a new book right now. In fact, I just started it yesterday.
Oh.
Yesterday, I've been thinking about it. I've been making notes. I've been formulating it in my mind. Yesterday morning at 10 o'clock, I wrote on the calendar, day one, came down to the computer and started writing.
Just did it. Wow.
And I'm just going to write it till it's done.
If you're open to sharing it, what's the inspiration on this one? Is there a central theme?
Oh, this is, it's called The End of Everything.
Ooh.
It's a novel, although the main character is called Fritz, and of course it's me. So I'm in a mental asylum and I'm plotting my own suicide.
Wow.
And the whole book is going on and is my commentary. It's basically a suicide note. The whole book is a commentary on dying. And,
wow.
And during that process of explaining, you know, the acceptance of death, of course, then the whole thing about the good life comes in. So it's going to be it's just going to be me blabbing about, you know, ranting about my my views basically through this character. So wow. Yeah, it's pretty dark, but hopefully it's going to be hilarious too.
You do have that edge. I love it. Your brief description. Like, I consider myself pretty a hilarious dude, a funny guy. I like your humor personally. I'm still fascinated by this rave culture. I know nothing about the rave culture. Nothing. Zero.
Yeah,
Nothing.
It's kind of a big deal at the time. It was very transformational. It was sort of, I likened it to the 60s revolution, you know, which was
really?
Kind of a transformation of music, you know, new culture, new fashion, sexuality, politics, all these things were affected and changed. It was a major social, cultural movement at the time. For about 10 or 15 years. It's kind of subsided now, and I'm waiting for the next new thing. But it was pretty powerful, and it was powerful for a lot of people that were involved in it. It was because it was really centered around the empathy and compassion. What MDMA does is it just opens you up to empathy and compassion with yourself, mostly. So you feel really good about yourself, sometimes for the first time in your life. And I could see that on people's faces, that they were going, whoa, this is what life can be like. And they had no idea. And they experienced that for the first time on their first hit of MDMA. Wow. And I started doing parties after a while, and I did them for a few years, and I had a very tight-knit group of people that became this incredibly close family. And people's lives were transformed right in front of my eyes. It was quite amazing.
It's so interesting to see how like small cultures create themselves around that, and like it speaks a lot to what I think like set and setting, but a lot of it's environment and the relationships that you're being supported by. Because I got to imagine there's plenty of people that have poor experiences too, but their influences and their drivers around it were not necessarily the same thing. Like that's really amazing to hear that you saw these people. I mean, I've experienced that at MDMA as well. I like very quiet environments personally, when I have experimented with things, and just because it's controlling like those external variables. But it's
yeah, well,
really
that's the thing about the other psychedelics, like mushrooms and acid. You can't, you can do those drugs at raves, and people do, of course, but it's not the right time or place for them at all, because you get overstimulated. There's too much stimulation. MDMA is unique in that it quietens your mind. It's like a meditation. I mean, like I said, I did quite a lot of meditation, and the most powerful meditation I ever did was on a couple of hits of MDMA, standing in front of two giant stacks with the music just vibrating through my body and going off on these transpersonal journeys. And that was the most powerful. I mean, I was so in the moment. There nothing else existed in the world, past, present, future. It was just all gone. I was just pure existence and pure joy in the moment, which is a pretty powerful meditation.
just being completely present. Huh? Wow.
Yeah. And I knew that state from meditation because I'd gotten there, and it's not easy to do, like meditation is kind of hard for people to grasp. They think you're just sitting quietly, and that's it's pretty good for you, to relax the mind and just to be quiet. But to actually get a state where you get the dissolution of the ego and you just become, you just have no boundaries. You just sort of become one with everything, if you like, it's like that cliche. But you can be so present and so in the moment that you just basically conflict free. There's no conflict in your mind. There's no conflict in your life. And that's a very powerful experience that it's not that easy to get to that through pure meditation. It takes many hours and sometimes years of practice to get to the point where okay, now I know where meditation is. With MDMA you can get there in 40 minutes.
Bing bang boom, now I understand the end goal.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's kind of the powerful thing, especially if you're layering a tool such as that can give you like, oh, this is what the end can feel like. What if I don't always have this? What if I go with meditation? Can I use that same practice? I understand, like, am I doing it right? A lot of people want to know, like, am I doing this thing right? I meditate personally. Right. And I can attest to some of those, like, oh, you just feel, it's almost a feeling of nothingness, but everything at the same time. That's kind of like the way I can feel. Like I feel very, you said, connected, complete, like one with the world, one with the universe, but things are quiet at the same time. It's a very wild experience when you really get into it.
Yes, it is. It's a unique frame of mind, and it takes quite a bit of practice to achieve that. But you can get to those types of states with psychedelics very, very quickly if you're using them with that in mind, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're dropping 2 hits of acid and going to see a horror movie, then you're going to have a bit of a different experience. That that speaks to responsible use and intention and all those other things. So if you're using it if you're using it as a tool for meditation, I mean, LSD focuses the mind like nothing else. If you do a lower dose and you use it as to concentrate on something, you can really concentrate on it. So if you turn that concentration inwards to a meditative state, it can get you there pretty quick.
Wow, I didn't know that. Especially
not
about
the higher
LSD.
doses, but low doses, and that's something that's happening right now all around the world. Is microdosing. It's the new big thing.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Like that's become like hot trend. Like, oh, I microdose shrooms or whatever, psilocybin.
Yeah, almost everybody I know is microdosing something.
Just microdose this now, microdose that now. I mean,
mostly LSD and psilocybin, because if you just take a little bit, you don't actually. And the idea of microdosing is you're not taking enough to actually get high. You don't notice any psychotropic effects. So you just it acts like it's sort of like an antidepressant, whereas it works in the background. It increases serotonin in your brain, and you feel better. You feel more positive, and And those lower doses, it can be great for like anxiety and depression, just generally improving your mood. And with something like LSD, it's such a tiny dose. Like if you're, a normal dose is about 100,000ths of a gram, you know, it's like a tiny, tiny little amount. So it doesn't really do anything physically. It's not enough, there's not enough material there to actually affect you physically or affect your physiology in a medical sense. It's purely, you know, psychological effect. And when you get down to the microdoses, I mean, there's no physical effect at all. It's just a neurological effect, a very, very subtle one. So, you know, it can be a lot more effective than antidepressants. And there's a lot of problems with antidepressants, right? They don't work for a lot of people. There's a lot of side effects, and sometimes they just don't work. And there's even been meta studies now which say that you're, you know, more likely to commit suicide if you're on antidepressants.
Really?
So this is a bit troubling. So they're not that effective. Microdosing seems to be more effective, and it seems to be safer. And now there's numerous studies going on for that as well, with psilocybin and LSD for depression and anxiety. And again, you know, the early results look amazing.
Wow. Not to mention what I've heard is that coming off of antidepressants is also a bit of a process. I've heard that
Yeah.
can be quite gruesome, and also like have some other nasty side effects within that. I'm not,
Yeah.
which is scary in of itself, but especially when like I feel like people get scripts left and right for that nowadays. It's almost like it's whatever, no big deal. Like it's a big deal. It's a big
Yeah,
deal.
no, the prescriptions, they're problematic because they're overprescribed and they're overused. You know, some of these, I mean, they're useful drugs for some things, but it's like benzodiazepines. You know, there's 16 different benzodiazepines, and they're great for just chilling you out, relaxing you, getting you to sleep, whatever. But they're a temporary measure. If you take these things every day, 365 days a year, yeah, there are huge problems with them. And that's coming out more and more now. One of the hardest addictions to get off is benzodiazepines. And they're one of the most prescribed drugs around.
Wow.
So this is a big problem.
Dare I say there's a conspiracy around that, but I won't go too far into that kind of in that kind of world. But it's just nice knowing that like there's potentially going to be far more options for people to be able to pursue that. My other thought to that is like, if somebody is using the microdosing strategy and they're showing up more, we'll call it happy and perhaps like a better version of themselves to various environments. I think about like if they're showing up to a job interview or they're showing up to whatever the thing is, I find happy people typically perform better, like in the tasks at hand that they need to do. Like, especially if there's a little more acuity and mental acuity and whatnot.
Yeah.
I got to imagine like that starts to close the loop on like, oh, wait, like I am changing my identity. I can do these things. I can, in fact, like from changing their mindset, then they have it reaffirmed in the real world, whatever that means. It closes the loop, and then it starts to rebuild this new identity that you have of like, I can do these things, or I can be more successful in that, or I can learn new things. I'm allowed to be curious, or
right.
This other way is also a possibility like that.
Yeah. It changes your mind.
Yeah, literally. And then it changes your outward behaviors.
That's what psychedelics do. They change your mind. They change your brain chemistry. They change your neurology. And, you know, for a lot of people, that's a big improvement, because we're all stuck in a rut in one way or another. And they're a great way to get out of it if you use them properly. And that's, you know, I can't overemphasize that. It's not like you just, you know, do these drugs and you transform yourself, but you have to still do the work yourself, but they make it, they're aids, you know.
So it kind of opens the door, but then it like, yeah, you got to walk through it still.
You got to walk through it. Yeah. And you got to decide how far you want to walk through it, and why you want to walk through it, and when you want to walk through it. So you still got to be in control of what you're doing. Your intention's got to be solid.
Yeah.
You got to be making your own decisions.
Well, I think that's a really prudent statement to make in there, because I think a lot of people are always still looking for the magic pill. Like, this is going to solve all my problems.
Yeah. Right. And it's like the promise of psychedelic therapy is now, so, oh, you know, LSD is good for this and mushrooms are good for this. And so we'll just gobble them all down and it's going to take care of all our problems. But psychedelic therapy only works with the therapy, right? I mean, if you're dealing with a specific or, an intractable, psychological problem like depression or anxiety or PTSD, you have to have the therapy. It's just that the psychedelics rewire your brain and make you more receptive. They amplify. I mean, that's what they do anyway. They amplify whatever's going on. A psychedelic drug doesn't put anything in your brain. There's nothing going on within the drug. There's no ideas there. There's no experience there. They're just chemicals. It's what they do in your brain. And so what comes up is what's there already, and it amplifies whatever's there. And that can be uncomfortable, if you have a lot of entrenched negative patterns, they can come up and it can be uncomfortable. And that's why you need the therapy with it. So you do the drug to open your mind and loosen things up and get your neural pathways firing in different directions, and then you do the therapy on top of that, and that's why it works.
It's not just magic pill and then you're fine and you go off into the world. It's integrating. No. I keep hearing integration in my mind of like it's working those things together and having and like
exactly. And that's the term that's what psychedelic therapists call it. They call it integration therapy. So you don't actually do therapy while you're on the mushrooms or the LSD or the MDMA. You do the therapy after the experience. Oh. You have the experience, and then you do what they're calling integration therapy, where you integrate that experience into your life. So and the therapist acts as a transitional element to transfer that experience or the benefits of it into manifest it into your real life in a concrete way.
Wow. It's almost like, hey, here's your lesson. How are you going to apply this? That right. I see the A-B step, like that's super crucial. And that's the results people are seeing in like 2 to 3 sessions. That's pretty impressive.
Yes, that's right. It's revolutionary, really. The people that are talking about the results of these studies that are going on, it's just blowing their minds, because some of these people have been studying certain drugs and therapy techniques for decades. Nobody's ever seen anything that works like psychedelics.
And especially as I look at the world right now, it just seems like there's this
need.
That's a great word to put it. Yeah, it's like almost this unrequited anxiety in mass that like everybody's searching, everybody's seeking, everybody's feeling lost, and just like put the pressure cooker of the entire cultural societal stuff around on top of it. That's a lot of pressure on a lot of people, that everybody's trying to just learn how to cope. But then, like, how do we reclaim the sense of, I guess people asking themselves, like, how do I feel like I can reclaim a sense of autonomy, a sense of ownership of myself? Well, like, clearly, if this is sounding like there's a promise here, or at least there's an opportunity for some of that chance. Like I have a shot at changing my world and feeling more optimistic about the world. I can see why it'd be very attractive right now and in high demand.
Yeah, you can't get autonomy from anybody else. You have to get it from you. You have to claim it for yourself. And once you've done that, then you're making your own decisions based on what you want, based on what's important to you, based on your values, and then you can improve the quality of your life. Without that, you're just a victim of information on the internet.
Whether it's right or wrong, or accurate or not accurate, that you're going to be
exactly
thrown around by it. Yeah. I just keep seeing people. It's like people just seem to want to know, like, what can I trust? Where is their clarity? And we've discussed it a few times here. It's like, you got to go inward. The only thing you can trust is yourself and your own intentions and your own behaviors. Like,
well, there's science too.
Yeah.
Science is our best method to find out what's true and what's not, and what works and what doesn't. It's really the only and best method we have. And so, that's not to say that there isn't corruption and deceit here and there, but on the whole, science has been the greatest boon for humanity that there's ever been. And we need to identify credible sources.
Yeah. Well, especially as we're talking about using psychedelics to incur a little more curiosity. isn't that like the foundation of science? Of like, it's a
Exactly.
hypothesis.
Yeah.
I'm
Exactly.
questioning. I'm going to test this hypothesis. Let's see where it
Yeah.
goes, and being open to new information and seeing what that leads to. It's actually not as rigid as people think it is. It's far more exploratory and far more open and curious at its nature. So I appreciate your
Yeah. I
reflection
mean,
on that.
you'll rarely hear a scientist say that this is absolutely true. You know, you will rarely hear a real scientist say anything like that. They'll say, well, as far as we can tell, you know, based on the evidence and based on the current, you know, scientific consensus, you know, this is probably the best answer. That's the way scientists talk. They don't ever say, this is absolutely true and it's never going to change, and that's it. You won't hear that. You know, it's not part of their, it's not part of the methodology at all. And yet people have that impression. They think, oh, science knows everything. The science is, you know, scientists are the first people to tell you that they don't know anything. First of all, they admit they don't know anything outside their own area of expertise. They say, oh, I don't know anything about biology. I'm a physicist, you know. So no, I have a lot of respect for science and scientists, and I keep up on a lot of the science around the consciousness, and is very, very interesting right now, and free will. I mean, these are subjects that are very, very fascinating, and a lot of people doing, you know, some good work, but we still have a lot to learn, and there may be many things that we'll never be able to figure out, but boy, have we figured out a lot so far in the last 100 years. You know, it's amazing.
It's cool to think we might even just be scratching the surface. So like,
I'm sure that's possible. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, I really appreciate all your thoughts today, my friend. Like, this has been, I'm excited to get copies of your books, because and especially the new one, the novel, I think that's going to be really interesting. But I really love your reflection, especially like, hey, this is just your interpretation of your stories, of the journey you've been on, like making it so personal and being so vulnerable around that. I think that's really cool, because hey, this is my path. This is what I taught me. I think that not enough people are willing to share what they've gone through, and how else can we make sense of somebody if they're not just real? So I appreciate that about you. But before we sign off today, like, anything else you want to share with the audience?
Well, I have a website called jimifritz.com, jimifritz.ca, sorry. It's in Canada, so it's jimifritz.ca. That's Jimi Fritz. And you can find all my books there. You can find my movies. I'm a filmmaker. I got 5 albums there. I got 24 music videos, which I made of my original songs in the last couple of years. So all this stuff is on jimifritz.ca.
Love it. What got you landed in Canada, of all things?
Just a chance meeting with a guy hitchhiking in England. I was hitchhiking down the road, and he picked me up and said, yeah, I'm from Canada. I said, oh yeah, where's that? He said, oh, you should come and visit me in Toronto. So I did. And that was in the late 70s. And I did a lot of traveling after that. Took me many years to actually get a passport. So I did eventually become a dual citizen. Wow. And that's the kind of a thread through the book too, is this journey, this never-ending journey through the immigration department, which seemed like it was never going to end. But I am actually a Canadian citizen now with a passport. So that was a result, and a long time coming. But yeah, Canada's a great country. I love it. I've lived in a lot of different countries, and I'll probably stay here until I drop dead now, which should be in about 17 years or 16 years, given the average lifespan of a Canadian.
Who knows? Maybe you'll push it a little longer.
Maybe.
I love it. I love it. Well, Jimmy, I really appreciate your time today. It's been wonderful getting to know you. Like I said, I'm looking forward to reading your books, and I'm going to check out your website. I'll put all your contact information on the show notes. Anybody who's looking to connect. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for just, again, your knowledge and your insights around this subject. I know a lot of people, it's just taboo and that they don't even want to open their mind to it, but like, I'm a wildly curious guy, and this has been fun to just share some time together.
Yeah, it's been a good chat. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Again, guys, I'm going to put Jimmy's contact information in the show notes. So if you want to connect, go check out his stuff at jimifritz.ca. But until next time, much love.